Well, I think we're about ready. Montana, would you like to start? Before Montana starts, I'm going to introduce her. I'm Lauren Barros with the Citizens Climate Lobby Wasatch Back, and Montana Barak is a Park City High School sophomore who is one of our biggest volunteers in the Citizens Climate Lobby. She's really active and gets a lot of stuff done. She's going to moderate the debate tonight, and I'll leave it to you, Montana. You're muted.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. It worked. It went on mute for a second. Hello and welcome everyone to tonight's Park City Mayoral and City Council Climate Debate. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to our candidates for taking their time to join us, along with all of our audience members. Climate change is obviously very important to our community, as well have many effects in our community in the future, from our economy to droughts to wildfires to so much more, and local policy is very important to addressing it. Before we begin, just a couple items to help us through the debate. At the end, there will be audience questions. We have a chat feature tonight, so if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. And then at the end, towards the audience questions, we will be looking through the questions and choosing some for both our city council members and our mayoral candidates as well. Besides that, we will be having our mayoral candidates debate first, and then our city council members. But before any of that, we are going to have some opening remarks. So for the opening remarks, all of our city council candidates and our mayoral candidates will each have 3 minutes to answer a guiding question. The guiding question is, what is your most significant policy proposal for Park City to mitigate and adapt to climate change? Andy, we'd like Andy Bierman to go first. Andy Bierman, you have 3 minutes to answer the guiding question.
Okay, thank you, Montana. Well, I think our most significant item is the one we're in the middle of right now and have excitingly made some progress, which is the conversion of the entire community to 100% renewable energy. And that is something that when the community set the goal in 2015 to go net zero by 2030 and have city operations net zero by 2022, we knew that there would be no way possible we could do that with the current mix of energy we get from Rocky Mountain Power. So at that time, we started seeking out allies in this, started working with Rocky Mountain Power, our utility, and leaning on them that this is a consumer choice issue and it could be of great benefit to them in the long run. And ultimately, we ran legislation in 2019 that was bipartisan, and it was focused on energy stability and consumer choice and stabilizing our creating predictable pricing for the future, and it passed. And so at this point, we need to deliver on that. We have formed a group. Initially, it was only Park City, Summit County, and Salt Lake that were interested in doing this. But it turns out that there is interest statewide. There are 20 other communities that are looking at going net zero, or excuse me, 100% renewable energy by 2030. And so we have formed a coalition that's working with Rocky Mountain Power to implement the construction and the pricing and the actually distribution of all this new renewable power. And so that's been one of the more exciting things to work on and something we want to see through. And I'm really looking forward to next Wednesday. We're going to be out in Tooele area cutting the ribbon on our first 80 megawatt solar plant that should be up and fully operational by the end of 2022. So your question was what we're looking at going forward. I think delivering that is the most important part, but I will throw something out there that excites me. We're doing a project with other mountain towns that's called Drawdown. And essentially we're analyzing, if you're familiar with Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown, it outlines the 50 best things you can do to reduce your energy footprint. So you can pick what fits for you in your lifestyle and realize what kind of impact you'll make. We have got a half dozen communities that are undergoing a scientific study right now to determine what is it in the mountain towns that moves the needle the most. And that's really going to give us a milepost going forward to figure out, should we be focused on electrifying our fleets, and zero waste, soil sequestration, building conservation? Do we need to worry about electric gutters and driveways? What are the real energy uses in town we should focus on? So I think that's gonna give us some great guidance. All the items I just mentioned, we're eventually going to need to get to, but let's start with low-hanging fruit.
Thank you, Andy. Next, Nan Worrell, you have 3 minutes. What is your your most significant policy proposal for Park City to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
Thanks so much, Lauren, and thanks to the Wasatch Back Citizens Climate Lobby for hosting tonight, and for everybody that's taken the time to tune in and make an informed decision in the upcoming election. You know, I agree with Andy. I think that the city is doing amazing things on a large scale. My focus tends to be on individual responsibility. I'm coming from a healthcare background where everyone is responsible for their own health. I've advocated for that my entire career, and I look to that with our climate issues as well. I believe very strongly in the power of community, and we're not going to be able to reach our goals without that. You know, when we look forward to our 2030 goal of being net zero for the entire community by then, it's going to come back to the individual. It's individual responsibility, and how do we as individual members of Park City take responsibility for our own actions and our own footprint? You know, how do we live smaller, less consumptive lifestyles? I loved This Green Earth this last week when, I'm going to murder his name probably, Capra Fritjof, talked about the bigger your impact is going to be, the smaller your footprint is. And so I think that we as a community, we as a city government need to be giving people the tools to be able to minimize their carbon footprint. How does that look? And I think that that starts with our city website. You know, what are some measurable things that people can do? If I, as a citizen that doesn't know anything about carbon, you know, about climate change or what I can do to help, where do I go for that information? Where can what's a trusted resource I can go to? And many people don't have that. And so I think I would start with making sure that our citizens have the tools that they need to be able to make a difference in their own carbon footprint. You know, I think that we need to give them resources to look at, how do I make a difference in consuming only the resources that I need, so that we have resources left for future generations like Montana's that are coming up. You know, what we do here in terms of recycling and transportation and water consumption, the amount of waste generated, that's all going to impact how we move going forward. And it comes back to the individual, especially here in our tourist economy. When we have so many visitors coming into town, how do we work with them? How do we let them know what our climate goals are? And so for me, that's going to be critical, is that we work with our lodging industry, we work with our vacation rental industry to make sure that we are letting our visitors know these are our community values, and this is how you can help us achieve those. Thank you.
Thank you, Nan, for your remarks. Tim Henley, you have 3 minutes to answer. What is your most significant policy proposal for Park City to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
Thanks, Montana. I've been called a lot of things through the years, Henley being one of them. My last name's Henny, but you know, that's okay. Goes back to high school days where they all called me Tim Henry for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, but no problem. Well, you know, I mean, Nan and Andy have hit on the 2 prongs of what we're trying to do with our energy critical priority in the community. I mean, Andy outlined sort of the high level and what you can do to change the source fuel for the grid. And I think we've had tremendous success in working with Rocky Mountain Power, which quite honestly, you know, 8 years ago when I joined council, there were a lot of skeptics and even a few cynics who said that was never going to happen. And here we are. 7 years after, recognizing and naming at the request of the community a critical priority of energy. And we're going to hit the municipal renewable use in 2022. We're on target for that. And we think that we have a legitimate shot at getting the entire community there. We just had a presentation from staff about decarbonization initiatives and efforts. We have a sustainability staff, Luke Carton, Celia Peterson. And I think what I would say is, that's a big part of what council does, and what I'll continue to do is be an active advocate for renewables and for changing the grid and for electrification and for minimizing our carbon footprint, both individually as a community and also as, a people and a country, because this is undoubtedly the most important issue. And as we all know, Americans do really well when they're faced with an enormous crisis that nobody thinks we're going to overcome, but we wait for the crisis. And that's kind of too bad and a little bit disappointing. So I think what I would hope to bring is a focus and a continued conversation on not waiting for this to become the crisis. The experts say we've already reached the tipping point. So in your question was, adaptation versus, things that we can do to reverse climate change. Guess what? We can't reverse climate change, at least not with current technology. So it's really going to be a focus on adaptation and sort of minimizing the collateral damage. But, fossil fuels come with enormous collateral damage. And I don't think we have full recognition of that at this point. To Nan's comments about, bringing people along who don't know about climate change. And I mean, I don't know what to say about that. If people don't know about climate change and they're still climate change deniers, and there are some in our community, I'm proud to say they are not supporters of my campaign, but there are some climate deniers in our community. That's a big thing we've got to tackle and bring along. We can't do it without everybody, being on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Tana Tolley, you have 3 minutes. What is your most significant policy proposal for Park City to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
Great, thank you. Can you hear me? It said I was muted.
We can.
Yeah, okay, great. So I agree with what everyone has already said. I'm, a proponent of what we've already done and would like to continue doing that. But I'll bring up a couple more points of where I would like to go. So I think we should really start focusing on green business initiatives and looking at regenerative farming, and then also, focusing on individual businesses and individuals' own, on individual businesses' supply chain. So understanding your supply chain as a business and where is your food coming from and how is that affecting the environment. And, regenerative farming is something that we don't talk about a lot, but it can, it's a low hanging fruit for a lot of us. So I think that's a great way for us to start that conversation with businesses. I know tonight was a introduction to the green business with the chambers. So I'm hoping that we all get to see that presentation as well. But there's lots of things that I think businesses are doing well, but I think we can also be doing better. And I'm really excited about the food waste initiative and zero waste that Park City is already trying to implement. I'm not sure if people know, but 1/5 of all the water that's used in the US is used to produce food that ends up going to waste. So that's, that just shows us a water problem and a food waste problem. And in especially owning a restaurant and understanding, how much waste do we use? We actually do not actually have a ton of waste, except for, when customers leave their food. But it'll be really great for us to, as a community, look at where we can make initiatives there. Also looking at things like compostable takeout containers, environmental friendly toiletries, bulk amenity buying, environmentally friendly cleaning products, and alternatives to plastic toxic room keys. So I think there's a lot of ways the tourism industry here can start really making an impact on climate change. And so the last thing I'd really like to see is that we as a city have a compost and waste collection plan that would be added to any of our conditions of approval inside of any sort of MPDs. So I think that would be great for us going forward, that anyone coming in and trying to put in a development would have these sorts of things in their conditions of approval.
Awesome. Thank you, Tana. Jeremy Rubel, you have 3 minutes. What is your most significant policy proposal for Park City to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
Thanks, Montana, and thanks for hosting this tonight, everyone who's doing that. It's kind of cool to see, especially your involvement from Park City High School. I have kids in the school system, so glad to see this is the kind of education that we're doing here. It's important stuff. So from a background perspective, briefly, I work in this industry. I'm a consultant with energy and utility organizations. I have been for almost 20 years now with the big 4 firms. I've worked with KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte. And I'm usually on the other side of that fence. So I represent the utilities. I work for the utilities, I should say. I'm a business consultant, not an attorney or anything. I shouldn't say represent, that's a bad word. But there are a lot of programs that can work, and there's a lot of intricacies into the programs that are even underway. And I'm glad that Park City as a municipality is going down the path that we are for the municipal energy and getting into renewables and everything. One of the important things to remember as we do this, right, is sort of being green is expensive. There's a cost to it. And that it's just another barrier that we have to overcome. It's one of those things that we're fortunate as a wealthy municipality to be able to do. But we also have to make sure that the residents and our community know the impact and really are clear on the costs of a lot of things that we're doing. One of the examples, for the Utah 100 stuff, I've spoken about it briefly at other events, but that will have an impact on the ratepayer's electric bill. In other words, your electric bill is going up, and that's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. People might be just fine with that. I just want to make sure that, as we talk about these solutions, folks understand the implication of the solutions also. And why I say that, I just saw something that came out today. That was Catherine Cahoe's speech that the video was sent out. And there was a slide that only 26% of the survey respondents are actually alarmed about climate change. And what I found in my business dealings is when folks aren't alarmed and they find out it costs them money or inconveniences them, that becomes a lot harder to overcome. So what I would like to see as the single largest policy change, since we are going to be updating the general plan based on the Vision 2020 here in the near future, and then that'll flow into the land management code, that we do codify some of the sort of green initiatives. And it's going to be a progression. We can't do it all day one. Again, we have to be pragmatic about this, but there are things we can do with the standards and for new construction and remodels alike, where it's not a significant burden necessarily on the folks performing those activities, but it also moves us in the direction of accomplishing environmental initiatives.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you to all the candidates for all of their remarks. Now we will shift to the debate between the mayoral candidates. We will ask 3 questions, and each mayoral candidate will have 3 minutes for an initial response and 2 minutes for rebuttal or to elaborate on their response after initial answers. The first question is from Kehoe, a senior at Park City High School. She asked, how do you plan on implementing sustainable practices in the local tourism industry, specifically Sundance? Andy, you have 3 minutes to answer the question.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay. That's a tricky one. As Nan pointed out, our tourists are difficult to, they may or may not share our particular values. And when you're traveling, you don't know where your recycling is. You may not be driving your electric vehicle. You're out of your element. I will say I ran for nearly 20 years a hotel on Main Street that was an eco-friendly hotel. We were one of the first hotels in the nation to go net zero. And what we found is it had to be fairly mechanical. If you were asking people just to behave well, they wouldn't. So we did things like we sorted the garbage to remove all the recycling. We put recycling bins out everywhere, and some people used them, but as our last line of defense, before we would empty it all out, we would pick out recycling. What we talked about earlier, having 100% renewable energy coming into town is critical, because our second homeowners and our visitors can't be depended upon to turn off the lights or even put in CFLs or LEDs or motion sensors and such. We don't know if they're going to be responsible on that front. So the fact that our electrons are coming in by renewable energy is gonna help that. A focus on transit will make a significant difference in our energy use and our type of energy and our air quality. So we are well on our way towards installing electric buses, and those electric buses and hopefully smaller electric shuttles, which we'll be getting, will be moving people around in a somewhat clean manner and reducing their footprint while they're here visiting. I think it doesn't hurt for us to set an example as a community too, and make this part of our mantra. People come here because of our clean air, our clean water, our great skies, and our mountains. And we need to remind them when we're here that that's why they're here, and that's why we stay here. And so asking them to help us keep it clean, to not idle, to not throw trash away, to not or to recycle when they're here and turn the lights off, and that, I think that could be something that the chamber could do as part of their marketing pledge or marketing push. And I've even seen communities that have made it as part of their pledge. When people come to town, they ask them to be respectful on the trails and pick up after themselves and lessen their impact. And I think there might be a fun and tactful way we can ask our visitors to do stuff like that.
Thank you for those remarks. Nan, you have 3 minutes. How do you plan on implementing sustainable practices in the local tourism industry?
With partners. I mean, that's the bottom line. We've got to partner. That's not something the city can accomplish by itself. And, I think that when we talk about Sundance, what a great partner they are. Because when you look at the film selections they have, when you look at the practices that they're implementing, they are trying their hardest to be green. But we do have a lot of visitors from around the world, and everybody has different practices in their own communities. Some communities put glass into their recycling. We don't do that here. And so it's a matter of education of our visitors. And I think that starts with a partnership with our lodging partners, saying at the minute somebody books, we're so happy that you're coming to Park City. Let us tell you a little bit about our community and what we value. Let's talk about our sustainability practices, because Park City is trying really hard to be a leader in this area, to be a role model for other communities. And I think people will come along. They just need to know what are the rules. Yes, when people are on vacation, do they want to have longer showers and use more towels? Absolutely, they do. But I think that's important that we have that conversation up front, starting from the minute that they book until they come into town. And I agree with Andy that I think the chamber has a big role that they can play in that as they're marketing to groups, as we have a lot of corporate business here. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to step up and say, hey, we're so glad that you're having your convention here. Let us tell you a little bit about where we are as a community and where you can help us get there. And I think people will come along with that. But again, that's not something the city can do alone. We've got to have partners in that, and we've got to be able to communicate to people why that's important and where we're going as a community.
Thank you, Nan, for all of those remarks. Andy, you have a 2-minute response.
Well, it's certainly not a rebuttal, but I will add to this conversation and say we do have a bit of a jump on this, in that both of our resorts just last month agreed to net zero by 2030. for the resorts, including zero waste and a whole suite of good environmental practices. So I think having our two biggest businesses in town showing the leadership, having the city and county showing leadership, it does get us steered in the right direction, which is going to help with those partnerships that Nan was talking about. Certainly leading by example is important. And the other thing I'll touch on that I didn't hit initially is the more the city can do to improve our code and requirements for more efficient buildings, for creating infrastructure for electric vehicles, and anything we can do to make conservation or green easier for the community is going to have a quick trickle down, not just to our residents, but everybody that comes and visits here.
Thank you, Andy, for that response. Nan, you have a 2-minute response.
Yeah, again, not a rebuttal, just kind of building on this same conversation because it's a big conversation and I'm so happy that we're having it. I want to clarify, an earlier remark that I made and Tim, that you brought up that we had climate deniers. I wasn't talking about climate deniers. I was talking about our residents, and that I think that transfers here over into our visitors. People want to do the right thing. They just don't know how to do it. And I think that there's an opportunity there, not only for the city, but other partners to help people figure out or help people have concrete steps on what they can do to contribute, to make small changes.
Thank you, Nan. We're ready for question 2. This question is from James O'Brien from Ms. McKenna's AP Environmental Science class. James asks, addressing climate change sometimes has significant upfront costs. How do you justify spending this money on behalf of the city? Nan, we'll start with you for 3 minutes.
Well, this is a critical priority for the city. And so I think that any initiatives that we have certainly will take priority as we go through the budgeting process. I am a big fan of looking at every decision that the city's made in terms of through a lens of the environment. We have talked a lot about looking at decisions that the council is making through the lens of social equity. I think this needs to be a lens that we apply equally as well. It can't be siloed. Climate, issues, initiatives that the city takes can't be siloed. They have to be incorporated. They have to be woven into everything that we're doing. And I think, excuse me, I think that starts with looking at this through the lens of sustainability and the environment.
Thank you, Nan. Andy, you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misperception that conservation and alternative or renewable energy is necessarily a lot more expensive. For example, the energy that the city is getting ready to convert over to, there will be a maximum of a 3% price increase out of the gate. And should traditional fossil fuels increase in the meantime, that's very quickly going to cross, and we're going to be spending less money rather than more. And based on what I'm seeing happen with natural gas, which I think has nearly doubled in the last couple of months, we might out of the gate be saving money for our community. So I think that shouldn't be a barrier. Certainly, we have to do this in an economically responsible way, but I think to assume that it's always going to cost more is not the case, and often the return on investment comes very quickly. And our sustainability department is ironically probably one of the least funded of our departments because they're able to pay for much of what they do through savings and grants and other such things. And a good example of that is our electric buses. Our electric buses, they are more expensive than a natural gas bus or a traditional bus, but we were able to get federal subsidies that paid for over 85% of those buses. We were able to get help from Rocky Mountain Power to pay almost 100% of our charger installs. And fuel costs for those buses is significant. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year we save in fuel now, running those on the entry corridors. So ditto for a lot of the conservation measures. You install LED bulbs and often they'll pay for themselves in a year or two, and they have a life cycle of 10 years. So a lot of this stuff is just a matter of making that capital investment upfront Certainly, we don't want to be too cutting edge where we're burning money or paying dearly for things. But a lot of this stuff is mainstream now, and we can find good products, source good products, and implement those. And those are going to very quickly lead to savings for our residents. And then I believe we should probably do a better job of tracking that savings and dedicating, if not all, a significant portion of that money into reinvesting into other conservation or efficiency measures, which then further save the city money.
Thank you, Mayor Bierman. Nan, you have 2 minutes for response.
Well, I don't disagree with anything that Andy has said. I think that those are all amazing efforts. But I appreciate the question, because what it did was remind me that we as a city need to do a better job of bringing people along and letting you know exactly what the return on investment is on the investment that the city is making in renewables, in our electric buses, in the charging and everything else that we're investing in. And I think that there is a way that we can be communicating that better to the public. And I'll advocate for that.
Thank you, Nan. Andy, do you have any response?
I can just add a little bit if we want to go into the land of wonky here. And one of the challenges when we had to get state legislation changed to be able to convert to utility scale renewables, part of the reasoning behind that is because the utilities have something that's called stranded cost. So when they build a coal plant or a natural gas plant, those plants, they amortize those over 50 years or something and attach that to your rate. So when you go to switch over power source, they want to charge you for however much of that is left, which is significant for most of these communities. So we had to negotiate our way through that for a reasonable deal. But the good news for Park City and Summit County and the other communities joining this is we are now no longer tied to fossil fuels as our future. And so if there is a carbon tax or a carbon fee that goes into place, we are going to be exempt from that because our energy is going to be coming from renewables. So it's really hard to predict where all this is going, but I think it's safe to say that fossil fuels are going to become increasingly expensive. So it's a great time to untether ourselves from those.
Thank you guys for these great remarks. Our next question is from Sebastian Nicholas. He asks, ongoing drought is a major issue that impacts agricultural production, quality of life, and our ability to fight wildfires locally. As we are surrounded by wildlands, wildfire risk should be a constant consideration for Park City and surrounding neighborhoods. If elected, what initiatives would you implement to prepare for drought and wildfires in our communities? We're going to start with Andy, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, that's a great question. And I'd like to just point out that Park City's water filtration and transportation is our single biggest energy use for the government. So that has been an area that the more water we save, we dramatically reduce our energy. And that is something that we've been very focused on as a city. And in the last decade, through conservation measures, leak detection, consumer education, and a pricing scale that rewards those that use less water and penalizes those that use excessive water, we've reduced our residential water use by about 40%. So that being said, drought in the Western US is looking like it's going to be persistent and increasingly problematic. So you ask how I would approach things different in a second term. I think we need to approach every day like it's a drought, that we need to put policies in place where we don't wait until dry summers to start conservation, that it is something that we do ongoing. And we prepare for the fact that I think water is going to become increasingly scarce in the West. That seems to be one of the very clear challenges we'll have with climate, because we have no water storage in Park City. Our water storage is our snowpack without any reservoirs. So when our snowpack melts early, that water runs downstream into reservoirs, and we're required to pump that back at extreme cost and energy use. So I think those are the place to start is with those conservation measures. We've got we have the ability, and council is currently talking about it, to change our land management code to encourage drought resistance plants and less grass. Unfortunately, for many years, Park City required grass and trees in all of our yards, and we're realizing that that's problematic. And going forward, we need to fix that right away. We need to make immediate changes to our code to prepare for drought-resistant yards. And we also need to go back and come up with incentives to encourage people to reduce the amount of grass in their yards, to pick trees that are, when they have to replace them, that are going to be drought-resistant, and reduce their overall water use.
Thank you for those remarks, Andy. Nan, you have 3 minutes to answer the question.
Thank you. What big concern for me is in talking with our public utilities director, Clint McAfee, 2/3 of our water consumption is used for irrigation. And so to build on Andy's point, we've got to be able to work with our homeowners to figure out how do we stop that use of water? What incentives can be given for people to do xeriscaping? It's very expensive to do that. And we have seniors that are trying to stay in their homes. We have middle income folks. We have people with lower economic means that also want to do the right thing, but it's just economically difficult for them to be able to change over their landscaping. So we need to be able to look back at incentives. How can we help them do that? The city certainly has cut back on watering on our big fields and on a municipal golf course and other city areas. And I don't know that many people have even noticed the difference, but there's been, a significant decrease in the amount of water that's used for irrigation. I'm very interested in other communities have a Cash for Grass program where the city actually helps along with people, especially on their parking strips or the areas next to the street, get some more drought tolerant plants in place. In terms of wildfire, that's a real concern of mine. And I'm so proud of Mike McComb, our emergency manager, and his collaboration with other agencies to come up with a really strong wildfire prevention program. What concerns me is that our residents may not know what to do in the event of a fire and if they have to evacuate. And so I've been an advocate for having some sort of a community evacuation drill. It's not okay to just say, well, you need to have a bag packed and be ready to leave. What does that really mean? What's the easiest way for you to exit your neighborhood? What roads are going to even be open? How do you make that plan? And so we've started the community education, and honestly, during the campaign, I've had those wildfire brochures with me at every event that I've done, because I think it's that critical that our community knows how to do home hardening, that our community knows how to create their own evacuation plan, but we need to have some sort of drill. We need to make sure that people know what they're supposed to be doing before they actually have to do it.
Thank you for those remarks, Nan. Andy, you have a 2-minute response.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on what I said earlier because I didn't get into wildfire. And just in general, I think if there's ever been a time where there's been a question when climate change is going to be here, it's always been something we keep saying is coming, it's coming. Well, it's here. At this summer, the skies were red and you could stare at the sun, and we were choking on smoke, coming off and on winter, going into a drought, and wildfires were hitting our community. And what that says to me is we are already behind the curve on resilience. We've been so focused on mitigation, we haven't really dove into the depth we should for preparing for the fact that we are going to have to start dealing with the impacts of climate change. And so I think now is as good a time as ever to jump in and start being more aggressive about our fuels reduction. And the city has started to dedicate funding to do that on our open space areas, as well as we're working with our resorts and the other big landowners in town to do their own fuel reduction. We already talked about what we need to do with water. I think we need to prepare for greater weather extremes and wildfire in terms of crisis management. We just had a drill, so to speak, a very real drill out at Summit Park, and we were pleased with how effective the response was. It was amazing, in fact, how quickly they jumped on that. But we need to continue to prepare for those sort of events. And then the last part we need to consider is there's going to be economic impacts. I think Park City, just like during COVID, people learn to appreciate what we have to offer here. I think as the world gets more warm, even though we're going to lose some of our snowpack, we're still going to be high altitude and cool and less people. So I think we'll still be an appealing place, but we need to consider its impacts on our economy. And we're very dependent upon our resorts at this point, and we need to diversify. Arts and culture is one of those things we can do. Incubating local businesses is another. So we need to look at the opportunities that could come with resilience.
Thank you, Andy, for the response. Nan, you have 2 minutes for a response.
Thank you for that. And again, just to build on what I've been talking about, the recent fire that happened and the evacuations that happened with that, it went as smoothly as it possibly could. And I'm happy, I'm thrilled actually that Mike McComb and other leaders are really looking closely at lessons learned there. I think that one of the lessons learned that we as a city need to take heed of and start making plans for is the impact on non-English speaking residents that needed to know what was going on, that needed to know about evacuation, needed to have places to go. And that was a shortfall. And the Community Foundation stepped in, and other Spanish speakers stepped in to help make phone calls and provide information to non-English speakers. But that population really wasn't included in the planning efforts. And I think that that's a lesson learned that we as a city need to heed and start on immediately.
Thank you for your response, Nan. Now we will shift to our city council candidates. For this debate, we will have 2 questions. We are going to ask 2 questions, and each each city council candidate will have 3 minutes for an initial response and 2 minutes for a rebuttal or to elaborate on the response after initial answers. Our first question is, Summit County and Park City have made significant commitments to source all electricity from new renewable sources by 2035. If elected, what concrete steps would you take during the next mayoral/city council term to realize this ambitious goal? We are going to start with Tana, and you have 3 minutes to respond to the question.
Great, thank you, Montana. And it's kind of funny, I always say you can figure out my name by saying it's like Montana, so it's nice to meet a Montana. So from what I understand, and I haven't been on council yet, so from what I understand, this right now we are working with other cities in the state, and we really need to get other cities beyond the 15, I believe, that have already signed up to do this. So, that would be one thing that we would focus on, is making sure that we can get other communities in Utah to take the initiative and to also join us in going net zero by 2030. So that would be one part, is getting that done, and really helping the community understand why we're doing this, and what differences does it make in their life, what are the actual what are the ramifications if we don't do this, and really showing everybody that we can be the leader in helping change climate change. And I think this is just the beginning for us, because this is just one step that we can take, and it's going to take a lot of things. It's not just going to be one thing of getting our electricity by 2030. This is going to take, having transportation solutions. This is going to take a lot of regional collaboration. This is going to take things like looking at reforestation, and that goes right hand in hand with when we were talking about drought, and how do we protect our wetlands, and how do we protect our aquifers, and how do we make sure that we have enough money to buy those if they come up, if instead of those going to be sold for development. So those would be my steps going forward.
Thank you for those remarks, Tana. Tim, you have 3 minutes.
Well, I think, we're making great strides. Montana, you said in your question, the goal of 2035. And I remember when we initially had this discussion about whether energy could and should be a critical priority at the request of the community, the community came and said, Yes, it should be. And then we had a very in-depth, numerous council meetings and work sessions, starting with study sessions and then going into work sessions. And the initial proposal from staff was that we were really pushing it to even think that we might be able to achieve that by 2035. Well, we've cut it down to 2030 just recently, and the accomplishments far exceeded anything that people thought was possible in a shorter period of time. So we're already doing it in a fairly aggressive and amazing way, and showing that leadership and doing it with the partners. You know, it is about working with the big resorts and kind of the chamber, the community with the critical priority, City Hall showing leadership, allocating tourism dividends in the way that we do through the budgeting process to make sure that we have projects in place that will push this initiative forward. And we've been very successful with that. So, you know, what to do in the future, I think we just keep the pedal to the metal. There are a lot of things that individuals can do. I don't know, you know, honestly, I don't know. I think that's higher fruit, quite honestly. I'm on subscriber solar and I pay $30 a month to use renewable energy through subscriber solar. I have all LED lights, and, you know, Nan and Andy will remember when we were doing the Georgetown Energy Prize with Summit Community Power Works, and the big push was to get everybody to swap out to LED lights. And of course, some people do, right? We had success. A lot of people swapped out, and a lot of people don't, because it really is a personal choice. And I'd like to tip that balance to, you know, more businesses, more partners, the chamber taking a very active role instead of a passive role. And that is happening. So I'm really encouraged. You know, the big businesses have come along. They've got robust programs in place already, which is why they've joined on to the target dates and think it's attainable. So, you know, we've got business behind us telling us, yes, it's attainable. Yes, it can be done financially and fiscally in a financial and fiscally responsible way. And we've got, you know, community members that continue to push. So I think the role of city council and council members is to continue to do the good work and have the conversations that brings the community along, allows them to engage, be part of that process, and we all get there together. And you know, that's my approach to it.
Thank you, Tim, for those remarks. Jeremy, you have 3 minutes.
Sure, thanks. So one of the keys to making this work is reducing consumption. And as folks have said, and as Tim just said, you know, getting folks to switch over to LED lights, you know, when you get your power bill, it shows you how you are with your neighbors. Other things we can do are education. So we can promote smaller appliances. That works. You know, there are electric steam ovens that cook just as efficiently as giant, you know, 36 or 48-inch electric ovens. Even better, because you don't have to do anything. You just push the magic button. It's great, actually. There's a lot of smart systems that you can use in the home. You can promote people to use toaster ovens even. You can educate people on power strips. A lot of folks don't know that you actually use quite a bit of electricity by just having things plugged in, call it vampire current. So that's all part of it. Then from a bigger picture, you can promote programs working with the utility. And that's something I'll bring my experience. Like I said, I mean, this is literally what I do for a living, and promote programs that work for the end consumers and the ratepayers. There are demand side management programs that work to lower consumption. We could also get creative and go down the path of microgrids. Those have proven very effective in other communities, and not just for getting to the renewables, but also for, there's a lot to it. Let's say there's a community benefit out of it, and there's strong grid resiliency from that. It's sort of a backup method. So there's a lot there. Also, I'd look to electrify the fleet completely. I think the city fleet, you know, when vehicles are replaced, and I know that's been happening, but I would support pushing hard to go that route as quickly as possible. And then using legislation when we can. So there was a House bill recently that lets us, like I talked about earlier, when we talk about codifying some of these initiatives, and work with development companies in, let's say, negotiating some of these things and incentivizing some of the larger developments to go to renewables and to make less of an impact on the community. So there are a lot of ways to do this. I could probably go on for hours, but I'll wrap it up there for now.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy, for your remarks. Tana, you have a 2-minute response.
Okay. Oh, there we go. So I don't have a rebuttal, but I do just have a couple more comments. Jeremy made me think of a couple things when he was saying, you know, the demand, but it also made me think, how do we as a city encourage people to just reduce the amount of electricity they're using, or reduce the amount of Amazon packages they're getting, or, you know, what is it that we are actually doing behind this energy and behind this electricity? And so how do we exemplify a minimalist approach to this, right? So if we have less consumption, this also helps with the climate change. And then last, I think it's very important as we talk about regional collaboration and even state collaboration, that Park City understands and has an opinion, just even knows that it's happening around the inland port, and understanding what can happen if this is built, and what does that look like for our air? What does that look like for transportation? It's a very, very large project. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage everyone to look at the inland port. But I think that Park City needs to have a stand, or at least give our citizens an understanding of what can happen if this is built.
Thank you for your remarks, Tana. Tim, you have a 2-minute response.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have a response, but I'll just continue to add on also. You know, there's a long list of things that can be done and have been done. And back to that Georgetown, I mean, that was the whole idea, was to bring people along, give them that education and all those things like vampire currency. And we spent 2 years aggressively promoting to the community all the steps that they could take. We kind of haven't done that more recently because we've been focused on sort of the bigger payoff issues of working with the legislature, putting in place for House Bill 411 that enabled much bigger steps to be taken. So little steps, big steps, they all add up. It's really good. You know, when I moved here in 1992, we used to have winters that now I look back on and I go, wow, those were epic winters. I mean, it was like being a 3-year-old again, when snow is above your waist and sometimes up to your chest. And that was regular. That was a regular occurrence. There was also a glacier on Mount Timpanogos that never went away all summer long. For the first 10 years I lived here, there was always snow, and significant snow on Mount Timpanogos up top. There's never snow on Timpanogos in August anymore. So that's the magnitude. And here I'm just going to frame it in terms of, we're talking about little things that, add up to big things, and big things that help move the needle. But we are headed for a massive crisis in the next 30 years. And I don't hear the sense of urgency. I'm not seeing the participation from people that is going to be required. And we got to get there, folks. We got to acknowledge this. We got to embrace it. We do have people who still think Kentucky bluegrass is the best thing for Park City lawns. And, they're going to irrigate and water. And we're at the top of the water cycle, and it's just not a good thing if we continue to ignore it and deny it.
Thank you, Tim, for that response. Jeremy, you have a 2-minute response.
Thanks. So yeah, I agree. We have to get to folks. Like I said earlier in that presentation from earlier today, only 26% of the folks were alarmed about this. And being able to reach the ones who don't see it as such an alarming issue is a critical success factor, really, not just in this community, but around the world. And, I think having that skill to be able to do so is going to pay a lot of dividends for us. And, just to hit on negotiation a bit with the utilities. So, the 30-second version is utilities earn return on their capital investments. It's guaranteed in the United States. Most places. It's different in Europe. But here, those investments literally pay dividends. And that's what gets built into the rates that we pay as consumers of whatever the commodity is. So there actually are pretty good ways to work collaboratively with the utilities and structure programs that don't necessarily burden communities and the ratepayers to the greater extent, let's say. And, you know, I'd like to be part of those conversations. Lastly, I'll just mention the picture that's behind me is one I took last year. And to Tim's point about the snow disappearing, you can't really see it here, but it's an open ski run where you're basically dodging, you know, the sagebrush that's up there and the scrub oak. And it's not good. So this is a serious issue, and we do have to take urgent action on it. We just have to be pragmatic about how we do it. It's not a pull the cord out of the socket type thing. It's a quick transition that makes sense from both a municipal perspective and then from a consumer ratepayer perspective, because those are different avenues.
Thank you, Jeremy. We're ready to move to our last formal question before we open it up to the audience. This is for all city council members, starting with Jeremy. And the question is from Citizens Climate Lobby member Keith English. List some of the things that you have implemented in your personal life to minimize your climate impact, as well as some things you'd like to do in the near future.
Sure, a lot. So, like I said, you know, I'm in this industry, so you got to practice what you preach, right? All the lights in our house are LED. You know, we big on the environmental impact of everything we do. It's all low usage, even from a water perspective. You know, we're big into passive heating and passive energy. When we remodeled the house, put in windows that allowed for that. A lot of times folks wanted to block out some of that stuff, and we actually embraced it and went with flooring that would also, like tile, that would be more tempered when there are changes in the indoor temperature. You know, about smart devices, I could ramble on about forever because I really geek out on that stuff. But it's how we knew today there was an unplanned water outage in our house because I got an alert on my phone to say your water pressure is low. Make sure nothing broke, because it also knew that there were freezing temperatures outside. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do. The one that I'd like to do that I haven't, to be honest, is our landscape. And that's because it's way too expensive right now. And there's been a lot of discussion about how the city can get involved to incentivize homeowners and HOAs to move away from high water use landscape. The payback's just not there. And you know, we just had a thing with Intermountain. It's 13-year payback for their hospital to do it. That doesn't make sense for most consumers. So we've just got to come up with creative programs to make that work, and we'll be first to sign up.
Thank you, Jeremy. Tana, list some of the things that you have implemented in your personal life to minimize your climate impact, as well as some things you'd like to do in the near future.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the question. So 3 years ago, I actually got really serious about my health, and I started doing a lot of biohacking as well. And a lot of the techniques that you use in biohacking are extremely healthy for the environment. So I'll just name a few of those. This one will make everyone laugh, especially today, but I only take cold showers. I only take quick cold showers. It's really good for your body, and it's actually really good for the environment. We eat almost completely organic, farmers market, grass finished meat, not just grass fed. We try to buy local meat from local farmers. I've removed any product in my house that has any sort of toxic ingredients, reduced any sort of chemicals that are in beauty and bath products. We really try to live a minimal lifestyle and have gotten serious about do we really need the things that we buy? And, you know, really, if we do want to buy something, I am really conscious of where it's made. Is it made organically? You know, the fashion industry is one of the most highly polluted, I think it's the second highly polluted industry out there. So I don't want to buy fast fashion. I want to buy clothes. If I'm going to buy clothes, I want to make sure they're going to last. Jeremy talking about smart technology, you know, we turn our there's kill switches you can buy for electricity and Wi-Fi. I implemented just because it really helps your sleep to not have Wi-Fi going through your house. And then we grow our own sprouts. We try not to use Amazon unless we have to. And then I'll use a couple from our business. we buy often, and we buy fresh, and we don't freeze our dough. We make our dough every time we need to. So basically we're consistently making dough versus saving it and then, causing it to have to be thrown out. So that's one way we do that. I'm also working with Recycle Utah. I've been chatting with them about what is a climate friendly way to recycle pizza boxes, because it's not, once a pizza touches that box, you can't recycle it. So we're working on some initiatives there. And then trying to figure out how to, we've been sampling some different organic flours, and then also figure out a way to implement organic produce. It's not as easy as you would think. It's very expensive, and a lot of the distributors don't want to do it. So, I'm trying to come up with some ideas on co-oping that with restaurants in Park City as well.
Thank you, Tana. Tim, you have 3 minutes. Please list some of the things you've implemented in your personal life to minimize your climate impact, as well as some of the things you'd like to do in the future.
Well, I'll start with my home. It's under 1,400 square feet. It's 1,375 square feet. So I'm living in sort of a minimalist envelope here. And the envelope, you can see behind me, the windows have shades that are pulled down all through the winter to create an extra layer of insulation, which you might think is, a little thing, but I have to tell you, it works, it adds up. All the windows in the home have that layer of insulation with a blind. I was looking to convert my wood burning fireplace to gas 4 years ago, and instead I've just stopped burning fires. So I'm not using my fireplace, which still exists. I haven't sealed it up or anything, but it just doesn't get used. I am, as I said earlier, on subscriber solar. I was initially on Blue Sky for a number of years, but you had to, there was a better offer from subscriber solar, which is actually using renewable energy, but you had to initially buy a certain block, and I wasn't using under the minimum block, but I bought the block anyway. And then just a year or two ago, they allowed for actual consumption, no minimum block purchase. And my bill with the block was $32 a month. My bill without the block is $30 a month. So it's really quite astounding. All the lights, as I said, are LED. The lights in the complex that I'm in are all LED, and that happened while I was a board member, actually the president of the board, and pushed that initiative, which was adopted. We had an 8-year payback, and everybody got on board, and we did that. My girlfriend and I share 2 cars. One is a diesel that gets 40 miles to the gallon, and one is a Leaf, which is all electric. And that's what I'm driving today. I ride the electric buses, or our buses, but oftentimes the electric buses as often as I can. And I bicycle and walk wherever I can, whenever I can, and try to stay out of the car. I go oftentimes 2-3 days without even getting in one of the vehicles. I also haven't eaten I do eat red meat occasionally, but it's about a quarter of what it used to be. And I start my day every morning with a spinach plant-based smoothie, which kicks me off really nicely. To Tana's points, I'm in complete agreement with that. And I know Andy's I think, plant-based person. And so I think those are probably the biggest things I do. I just try to live a minimalist life and leave as small a footprint as I possibly can. And the data tends to indicate that it's fairly successful. But to my prior comments, not successful enough given the wall we are headed towards.
Thank you, Tim. Jeremy, you have 2 minutes if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, sure. I don't need 2 minutes, but a couple things for folks to consider. I mean, Tim just mentioned the electric bikes. I use an electric bike because I'm not in as good a shape, but it is what it is. But it's my new favorite thing. I really love it. And I know hate's a strong word, and I'll say I hate driving. I really do. I mean, I'm used to being on the road in my career when I was with the firms. Now I'm independent, and so I can work from home. But that also helps a lot, right? Getting off airplanes. Folks don't realize airplanes are really bad for the environment. They really are. So, this sort of new world of Zoom like we're on now is significant, and it helps. I'd also encourage folks to look at mini split systems for their HVAC in their home. It saves a ton of energy and it's actually way cheaper for the consumer and works better. Dual fuel ovens, if you must have a gas cooktop, because some people are insistent, at least get an electric oven part of that. And then your outdoor lights, you know, obviously they should be LED and dark sky compliant, but you can also have them now on motion detectors that are linked up so that even those aren't on all the time. They're only on, you know, if it's a safety concern and someone's walking around your house. Sometimes you catch a moose, but that's cool too. But you know, they don't need to be on all night. So I would encourage folks not to keep them on, you know, during the wee hours.
Thank you, Jeremy. Tana, would you like to add anything?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Tim, do you want to tell any more?
You know, there's always room to continue and to push and to find new things. You know, Andy referenced drawdown with, you know, 50 things that everybody can do and you pick and choose. I think my point is the picking and choosing amongst the 50 that, you know, most appropriately fit your circumstance and phase of life and, you know, convenience threshold. We're kind of getting beyond that. We're going to have to do all 50 here if we're going to make any progress at all. But the big one is to get away from fossil fuels wherever possible. Fossil fuels, as I said earlier, just come with a tremendous amount of collateral damage, and we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it in the forests. We're seeing it with fires. We're seeing it with weather. We're seeing it with snowpack and water, and it's just unacceptable at this point. You know, that's a term that I use quite often, but I think that, you know, and I feel bad for being part of that problem, as we all are. But I have to say, sometimes I go up to a place like, you know, some of our wonderful lodging establishments, and there's a natural gas fire just burning because it's nice. It's a nice ambiance. We are well beyond nice ambiance fireplaces. And, you know, the reality is going to come home. The chickens are coming home to roost. We got to get real about this. We got to recognize the reality of what is, and everybody start pulling in the same direction.
Thank you, Tim, for that response. Now we're going to move on to our open forum. So in our open forum, as a reminder, audience members can ask questions of the candidates in first come, first serve order. Yeah, and we already have a couple questions to begin with. So feel free to put some more questions in the chat, and if we have time, we can get to them. Our first question is from Ben Abbott. He asked, how would you use the influence of Park City to encourage statewide changes in policy? And yeah, 2 minutes per candidate. So whoever wants to go first. And this is for both the mayoral and city council candidates. So anyone.
Well, I'll jump in if no one else wants to do this. And I would say we are already doing quite a bit of that. You know, not to overly harp on it, but HB 411, our renewable energy bill, initially we went there with 3 entities wanting it, and we've got 20 cities across Utah that are now looking at signing on, and that's nearly half the Rocky Mountain power grid. But personally, I've been involved on the Utah League of Cities and Towns board, which represents the 248 cities in Utah, and we are one of the larger and stronger lobbying organizations when it comes to the legislature in terms of lobbying for our communities. And we are starting as a group to put pressure on the state to be more thoughtful in their policies in ways to address climate and air quality. In fact, a few of us, in particular, Mayor Mendenhall and myself and Mayor Silver-Straney, who's the mayor of Mill Creek, the 3 of us pushed an initiative where we made it part of the plank of the entire league to support bills that support climate and clean air. So that is now, whenever those come up, they are supported by the league. I think that could be fleshed out, though. We could be much more aggressive. And the area where I see the greatest opportunity for us to make a difference on a state level is building code. we every year the state adopts new building code, but we are about 10 or 15 years behind on the efficiency side of that code. They leave that element out. So there is huge room for improvement. And I have to say, I'm encouraged. I don't know all the details yet, but I believe it was yesterday, the senator from Cottonwood Heights, Kirk Cullimore, is forwarding a bill that would bring our green building standards forward in a hurry for the state. And that's something I'm going to encourage my peers to get behind and really push this session, because with as much building that's going on, we have great opportunity there.
And I'll just say that, to add on to Andy's perspective, we're in a somewhat unique position in Park City with respect to the rest of the state. And we can be a very positive example for these sorts of aspirational goals and desires that then we show are not just aspirational, can actually be accomplished. And I think that working with Summit County, working with the Chamber Bureau, working with Park City Mountain and Deer Valley, and all of us coming together and working in partnership to show what actually can be accomplished and setting goals that now we're on track to meet is just the way that we can influence the rest of the state. To Andy's point about, who signed on for HB 411, that list continues to grow. And initially there was concern we might be the only 3. And then suddenly it was 8, and then suddenly it was 10, and then suddenly it was 15, and then 20, and here we are at 20. And that's leadership. That's a very positive example, and that's a role of not only achieving, recognizing what needs to be done, creating a policy, but a plan, and then implementing and making progress toward that plan. And that can only be done with people like the Chamber and the big economic drivers, the corporate interests in the community, as well as community members. We had the grassroots support from the beginning. The citizens had the political will, and it's thrilling to me to see the 2 big resorts line up. And also probably the most thrilling is to see the Chamber now embracing the community values such as environment, energy, and renewables.
If I may, sorry, Nan, you want to go ahead? Okay. So a couple things. One is, as I spoke about earlier, I just want to make sure the community understands what the program is. And a lot of that, I think, is speaking the language of the energy generation side and of the utility side, which I do. We are taking a bit of risk in it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but how it's structured, right, is if someone drops out, we have to pick up a little bit of a bigger tab, and we're still unsure on those end rate increases. So what I'd like to do, and I think it relates to the question, because when we talk about how we're going to push it across the state, is work with those utility organizations, again, from speaking their language and showing them how they benefit from this too, because they really do, not just financially, but also for resiliency, of their grid, and even on the gas side for the gas network. And both major utilities in Utah are owned by major out-of-state corporations. They're investor-owned, right? Pacific Corp owns Rocky Mountain, and Dominion's our gas provider now, is based back east. And being able to work with them and get them on board, it's a strong lobby. And if we can team up and go to the state together, it's a no-brainer. It's a win-win for everybody. And I know some of that's been happening. I want to take it further. There's a lot of opportunity.
Well, I'll jump in. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I think that we really need to give a shout out to the staff of Park City Municipal, Luke Carton and Celia Peterson, because both of them are great about looking for opportunities and identifying where the city can fit in and then taking the charge. Luke amazes me because he really geeks out and he knows the language, as Jeremy talked about speaking that language, but he's able to bring it down to an everyday understandable level. And I think that's crucial, especially as we're bringing the community along. We need to not talk in the big jargon. We need to be able to bring it down to levels that everybody can understand. And we've got to give our staff credit for the help they have given in running the bills, in making sure that they were understandable, in bringing other partners to the table.
Great. I'll just add a couple quick things. I think everybody said what I was going to say. So one is that as soon as we have finished this, it's called the Global Sustainable Tourism Council Destination Assessment. Wanted to get that correct from the chamber. I think that's a great starting point for us to share with other communities around Utah on how to have sustainable tourism. I also think that we should be utilizing our nonprofits, and we have such a amazing community here full of amazing nonprofits, and a lot of these are environmental nonprofits. And so how do we show the rest of the state and encourage people to set up nonprofits that do the same things that we do here?
Thank you, Tana. It looks like, and there are so many questions, but I think the next question we're going to choose is from Leela Shea. This again for all the candidates. How will you codify, incentivize, and enforce the sustainable building measures you've discussed? How do we offset the impact of the increased water and energy demand in building materials, which include embodied carbon, for new developments?
I can just jump in. And so this is just one of the ideas that I've been actually looking into, and they do this in Portland. And this idea came from my time serving on the Historical Preservation Board, but they actually have they've been instrumental in putting together a deconstructing and deconstructing versus demolishing guidelines for historic homes, so that it prevents the material from going into landfills. So I think it would be great for us to look at that when we're doing some sort of remodels, or when we have historical homes that are coming to the Historical Preservation Board. I can tell you that a lot of times the material that is not kept, and a lot of times we're just going back to the very original home, is just thrown right into our landfill. So how do we, as a city, figure out ways that when we deconstruct a home or someone goes through a remodel, that type of material can be used, whether that's either in another home, maybe it's used for chairs and tables in a restaurant or an art project or something like that. But I think it would be great for us to have guidelines that don't just allow for us to continue to throw away something from a demolished house.
Yeah, and I think the way that you possibly weave that in is there's a problem in Utah, which is we're not allowed to adopt mandatory energy codes. So by law, we can't do that. So, but that sort of opens the door to these things Tana's talking about, which are not energy codes. They're alternative ways of dealing with decarbonization. And we just had a complete report at last Thursday's work session on this issue of decarbonizing existing homes. But recycling is something that you can do in a community. It's hard to mandate, but you can make the cost of not recycling prohibitive and punitive. And so that's where you can build in that free market incentivizer. If somebody takes a truckload of deconstructed construction material to the landfill, they pay a punitive price for dumping it, and that incentivizes deconstruction, taking stuff to Recycle Utah, where they already have areas for selling, reusing, repurposing deconstructed material from homes. Same thing with the Restore at Habitat for Humanity out by Home Depot. They have a very similar program there, and those are big revenue generators. There are a lot of people doing that voluntarily. But the way you incentivize that voluntary action is you make it prohibitive to just haul it off and get charged whatever the nominal fee is, the tipping fee at the landfill. So that's a way that you can get around some of these things and actually make it happen. But we are prohibited from doing, from codifying things in Utah by state legislature.
Let me add couple of things here. So the House bill that I think I was talking about, I'll have to check the number, is 1003, which is relatively recent. And in the industry, there have been some legal interpretations of little lines in that bill that would sort of crack open the door. I mean, I'm not disputing what Tim said, but I am saying that opportunity may be presenting itself here in the near future to at least start down that path, which would be great. So I'd like to look at that. Also, the SCPW program that's out there, gamification works. It really does. We could look at different ways to reach people. I think it's a pretty good program, but I'm biased because, you know, I pay attention to that stuff. And we do need to reach more folks in our community, so we can look at how to expand sort of the gamification of that. And then rebate programs. They are extremely successful in the industry, and they're relatively low cost. So even if we were to get involved in backing some of those programs, a lot of this is when folks understand how even egregious their consumption is in many cases, they do change their behavior. And a lot of it is they just don't understand that X appliances uses X amount of resources kind of thing. So those are a few examples. Again, we could go on and on, but that's a start.
Well, to build on what Jeremy just said, I'd like to see us take a step back and start working with the architects and the designers and the builders, because many homeowners or prospective homeowners or people that are building homes don't know what the options are. And I think if presented with, this is more energy efficient than this other option, I think that's a great place to start. It starts with the education. You know, and I've spoken about this before. My husband and I were second homeowners here. We built long distance from a community that was not even remotely green, that the topic never came up. And so when we were building our home, we would very much have appreciated our builder and our architect telling us, these are some different options for you. If you do this, it's going to not only save you money, it's going to be better for the community, and it's going to help you help the community meet some of their goals. So again, it goes back to the education process. I think people will be willing to do it. They just need to know how.
As we've said before, we're very, very much hamstrung by the state legislature who sets the building code that we can implement. So I think any efforts we can do to lobby down there and get that changed and updated is going to go a long way. That being said, Tana brought up a great point with the deconstruction. That is something that I think we should explore and incentivize and encourage in the town. I did that with my house, where we basically deconstructed the entire house and took it over to Recycle Utah, and they turned around and sold it all. So it worked on many levels, and that the materials got reused. It was used as a fundraiser. And I think there are ways that we can recommend that for certain projects and save a lot of waste, as well as be more efficient in our materials. Some other things we could do is we need to update our LMC to better reflect our goals and to take a look at new materials. Things like Tesla roofs are a gray area, whether we can actually put those on our homes. In Old Town, there are problems with triple pane windows, depending on the materials they're made with, and there's serious restrictions on our historic homes. And at the end of the day, I think we very much want our historic homes to have people living in them, which means they should be efficient and they should be comfortable. And we're going to have to find ways to make compromises there so they're more livable. There are other areas that I kind of have a target on that I don't know exactly how we get there, but we should be coming up with creative ways to incentivize. We've got hot tubs, we have heated driveways, and we have large gas fireplaces, gas and wood fireplaces. And those are all areas that are mountain town luxuries. They're things that our guests love, that we love, but they are terrible for our environment. So we should find ways to discourage those. We can't restrict them, but maybe there are incentives that we can find to reduce the installation of those in our homes.
Well, I'm waiting for a program like the one that went in place in Aspen, where if you want to put in a wood burning fireplace, you have to buy the entitlement for someone who's willing to close off their fireplace or convert it. That's why I'm hanging on to my fireplace here, because eventually that program's coming to Park City and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm with Tim. I actually have a TV in front of the fireplace that's right in front of me. I'm not ripping it out so I can sell it to someone later. No, I got it. I got it.
All right. Well, it looks like we're pretty much out of time for, oh. Sorry. Yeah, it looks like we're pretty much out of time for tonight's debate. We want to thank all of our candidates for joining, along with all of our attendees. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for submitting questions. Thanks to all the high schoolers who submitted questions for this debate. For all the voters out there, hopefully you became more educated on what the candidates for both mayor and city council think about climate change. So make sure to vote for climate this November. Check your mailboxes. And also, as a reminder, the Citizens Climate Lobby organized this debate. If you're interested in joining the Citizens Climate Lobby, you can email wasatchback@citizensclimatelobby.org or find the Citizens Climate Lobby on the at Wasatch Back CCL or on Instagram at Citizens Climate Lobby Park City, and then Wasatch Back on Facebook is on Facebook as well under the same thing. Yeah, so thank you again for joining us tonight and have a good night.
Thanks, Montana.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Montana.
Thanks so